access. This is where ed tech and all the things being talked about here can do beautiful work. But for significant numbers of children in all languages that have been studied to date, reading is also more difficult because of essentially brain-based differences in how brains are organized that make some skills really easy, but literate language, reading, really hard. And this occurs in 5 to 10% of kids. It's persistent into adulthood. It's universal. And it is something that will compound and add to the challenges of reading and the challenges to educators. No matter where you are, you're going to be dealing with a percentage of kids who struggle from factors that are not just environmental, but are also congenital. And we need to be able to understand these, and as I said, try to develop treatments that are tailored. So we developed something called the Haskins Global Language and Literacy Hub that Nandini alluded to. And we put together our people that already have connections to Haskins Laboratories, which is known as an international resource in the United States. We have research collaborations in 35 countries. So there's a long history of these kinds of connections. And we have a couple of target goals. Improving early assessment. Let me be very clear. Learning to read, as you'll see in a minute, doesn't start at the age of 5. It starts when you're a baby. And I don't mean you teach babies to read, but you give babies the extensive, beautiful language exposure, the vocabulary building, the phonetic structure that allows literate language to map into those areas at the appropriate age. We're interested in using ed tech to facilitate evidence-based practice, and we're interested in working in respectful partnerships with educators and researchers. Not researchers telling educators one thing or educators telling researchers another, but solving these problems together. The team itself, this is the key leadership of the team. Many of the people whose pictures are on here come from a variety of fields ranging from genetics to education to cognitive neuroscience. We also have, representing India, of course, Dr. Nandini Chatterjee Singh, and a number of people ranging from genetics to neuroimaging. Our goals are obvious and the same as everyone here. We want to improve global literacy rates, we want to prevent literacy failure, and we want to explore the possibility that digital tools can be helpful. Our approach is rooted in the brain, in taking neuroscience and developmental neuroscience, birth to death, and using it in conjunction with ed tech and what's called implementation science, which is best practice in the classroom. And having those three things be fused and linked to one another. And we take this developmental perspective very seriously. So we want to understand success or failure in reading and how to improve outcomes. We have to look back at the earliest neurobiologic and environmental factors. Environment and genes and brain networks can produce a risk that can create a negative spiral that leads to poor literacy outcomes. We all know this. That involved 4 languages. Chinese, English, Finnish, and Dutch. And we were watching these kids develop into fluent readers or not. We were trying to understand the genetic and neurobiologic factors. But we also had a significant numbers of children who very early on were what clinicians call late talkers. These are kids who did not produce oral language on time. Many of them underwent therapy. But we're now looking at these kids who are now learning to read, and many studies around the world have shown that late talking and early speech motor problems are a risk factor for reading problems. Not every child who's a late talker reads poorly. Not every poor reader was a late talker, but there's a strong relation. So we actually looked at this and we replicated at a behavioral level that children at age 7, when we had them in the scanner, who had been severe language impairment early on average were doing worse on all of our standardized assessments. And when we mapped their brain using Fmri, now in this image, the left hemisphere is on the right side. It's a radiologic slice. And what you're seeing is that even at age 7, these children who had early language problems are showing a rather intensively strong black hole in activation of the frontal basal ganglia thalamic language circuitry that's crucial for automaticity and learning. So good reading and risk for reading problems starts young. What is learning to read itself? This is a very important slide. Pay attention for a minute, and if I can walk you through this slide, everything else will make sense if I do my job. Okay. This is an fMRI study of skilled adult readers in English. No reading problems, no nothing. They're doing one of two things. In one condition, they read words, and in another condition, they listen to words. Pretty straightforward. I am looking at how skilled readers create representations that bind oral and written language. The premium of skilled reading is to be able to leverage the machinery that nature gave you for talking and listening, for reading and writing. So if you look at the areas in red, that's the auditory cortex. Those are areas in the primary and secondary auditory cortex that respond to what? To words that you hear. In yellow, in the back of the head, in the occipital lobe, those are areas that respond to what? To the printed words only, because it's the visual cortex. But what happens in skilled readers is shown in green. And in green, this is just a statistical rendering. What you're looking at is that in skilled readers, areas that are involved in oral language, like Wernicke's area, and Broca's area, and supramarginal gyrus, and other important tissue, is no longer caring whether the stimulus came here or here. In other words, skilled reading creates a binding. It creates a reorganization such that you're able to treat print as if it came to your ear, to put it in a silly way. And this turns out to be the single best predictor of reading outcomes. This was a study we published, Psychological Science, about 2 or 3 years ago, where we took the children's brains at age 7 and we predicted reading comprehension and reading at age 9, 2 years later. And the single best predictor was whether you see the green in Wernicke's area and Broca's area. And in other words, whether or not you're able to transform natural language systems into literate tissue. This was the single best predictor, reliable above all controls, even the autoregressor, and all, for those of you who do research, I'm sorry, I can't resist. And what about other languages? So this is a study we published a couple of years ago in 4 languages, in PNAS, Spanish, English, Hebrew, and Chinese. And the bottom line of this study was, it didn't matter a jot whether you were looking at a very transparent language like Spanish, which is much more regular, like the Hindi akshars, or English, which is irregular, or Hebrew, unpointed Hebrew, which is very non-transparent, or opaque Chinese. This process of reorganizing this tissue, this binding, this creating a natural language structure that literate language can sit on top of, is the key to success in all these languages. And this is studies that have been done in the NRBC, did I say that? NBRC, the National Brain Research Center, one of my favorite places. And which have also seen this, studies we've done together and others, showing this universality even in children who are biliterate. As Nandini often mentions, children in this country need to learn many languages, and that's a strengthening of the brain. Okay, so what do we know about dyslexia? Let me speed this up a little bit. Dyslexia, first of all, we have to start with definitions. Dyslexia is not intelligence. So some smug, arrogant person who says, well, dyslexic kids, maybe they're lazy or not so smart. That is absolutely untrue. Intelligence is orthogonal to reading disability. Literally, there's no statistical relation. You could be a genius and be dyslexic. You could be average and be dyslexic, or you could be below average and be dyslexic. So these bright, beautiful kids are not lazy or stupid. But they have a difference in brain that can produce some advantages and critical disadvantages in making that map, in transforming language tissue so that you can get from vision into it bloody fast. It occurs across the full range of abilities. It occurs in all languages. What do we know about dyslexic children? This is a study, I'm just going to give you a flavor of this as I get close to the end of my time. This is a study we did some years ago at Yale and in my lab, where we looked at 144 brains, children, in a scanner, between the ages of 7 and 17. Half of them were non-impaired, typically developing, and half were dyslexic. And the most important point is that the typically developing kids, here the left is on the left, as they went from being beginning readers to automatic readers and they began to change that speech area into literate tissue, they also began to develop specialization of a region that Greg talked about the other night called the visual word form area. So the higher the reading ability, the more you develop specialized tissue that allows rapid mapping from vision to language. An area that happens to live in an area that's very good at pattern recognition. But in the absence of treatment, look at the dyslexics. As they go from 7 to 8, 15, they go everywhere and nowhere. There isn't that pattern of developmental trajectory. So here's the $64,000 question. Can brain imaging be sensitive to whether treatment works? And the answer is yes, unequivocally. This is a study, we did one of the original studies in this. We tracked kids for 3 years. Pre-treatment, 12 months of treatment. Good treatment, by the way, for reading and language is phonetic, it is language-based, and it is following your grandmother's rule. Practice, practice, practice. I have a colleague here, Margie Gillis, who's sitting in the front. We've worked together. She is an expert at how to design curricula and treatment for kids that are evidence-based, that are phonics-based. What we did, we silly brain guys, all we did was look at the brain pre, post, and 1-year follow-up. Now, in that slide, I couldn't flip it. The left hemisphere is on the left side. And what you're seeing is that children responding to treatment are actually gaining in all of the major components, especially the visual word form area. So, when treatment works, the brain changes, as it should. Have we done our job? Have we answered everything? Should we go home and celebrate? No. Because what about the fact that many kids don't respond? The real promise of neuroscience and what is driving this global initiative that I'm going to end with is the ability to tailor the treatment to the individual. Most kids respond to treatment, but not all. In the case of our study, 75% responded pretty well, 25% did not. There's absolutely no reason to be saying we've done something unless we can reach those kids, those more intractable cases. So the promise of neuroscience is that it can provide insights into what works for whom and why. And we're currently doing 2 large NIH studies that we've now moved into the AIM project that Nandini talked about. The big questions are, do brain responders change differently during intervention than non-responders? How does the brain change with intervention? How does the brain change at different points in intervention? And finally, what are the predictors of brain change? Now let me just tell you something. If any of you have worked with children with learning difficulties, you know this. Treatment is never like this. The child gets better every single day. What happens is you practice and you work with the child and they're flat. And all of a sudden a light bulb goes off during treatment, bing, and they start to move. If I'm looking at the brain pre and post, I can't see that light bulb. That light bulb at a neurologic level involves probably changes in control systems, working with language and visual areas, and reinforcing functional connectivity, which is the degree to which different tissue works together. So in order to see that, we need to image the brain consistently over the course of treatment. So the 2 projects are done, one in Atlanta and one in Connecticut, and now we've mapped these into the school projects. We use a combination of in-school, evidence-based treatment. This is a program developed by Maureen Lovett that has been very effective in treating reading and is easily applicable to other languages. We're also working with an EdTech component, GraphoGame, which has been very helpful in bringing the grapheme phoneme learning to the lab and then to the school. This is just a general finding, replicating what we've done in the past. You see that area that I talked about, that language tissue? We see no activation there pre-intervention, and on average, among 80 subjects thus far, we see that when the treatment works, we get the brain change. But we've already done that. I need to understand the differences. Use brain imaging to get at individual differences. And so this is an example. We can separate the kids into responders and non-responders and ask what it was at the beginning and what it was at the end and during that gives us key insight into those kids. And we're getting all kinds of new insights now in why some kids respond and others don't. There's a lot of science I can't possibly summarize, and I'm out of time. But we're also doing the frequent imaging using a combination of MRI and optical imaging called NIRS, and we're doing it over the course of treatment. This is a data point from one of our subjects, it's illustrative, a child in the school who is undergoing this intensive 80-hour treatment. And what you can see is the connectivity between Broca's and Wernicke's is sort of flat at the beginning, and all of a sudden that light bulb goes off and the child starts going up. Now, some kids go up earlier, some kids go up later. The promise of neuroscience is in understanding why, who these kids are, and then to move to the final new directions, my last slides. We need to be able to leverage the co-creation with schools, as Nandini mentioned, and do actually bring the neuroscience into the classroom. And our partners at the AIM Institute, the AIM Academy, and now another group in New York at the Windward School have agreed to let us bring the neuroscience into the school. And cheap neuroscience, not big MRI machines, which are impossible. But things like very relatively inexpensive EEG and NIRS caps, so that we can work with the kids and understand how they're learning, how they're responding to treatments. And we're, again, working with bringing these technologies into the school. I want to mention 3 areas very quickly that we're doing that are very exciting, cutting-edge neuroscience. And we're doing it in the in-school project, the one that Nandini and I were talking about. One is called hyperscanning. The human brain does not live in a vacuum. It lives in relation to other brains. And my colleagues at Yale, Joy Hirsch, and her team have created a setup where we can take the same 2 children in communication, put caps on them, and look at the degree to which one brain interacts and correlates with another. There's an extraordinary thing that happens. If I'm actually understanding you and you're understanding me, my Broca's and your Wernicke's become correlated, literally. Okay? And to the degree that the education program is effective, it should be creating that parity. And so we can't just look in the brain, we need to look at the social brain. And frankly, when we look beyond that, this is an example from a very good group at NYU where they put caps on the entire classroom and the teacher to get a sense of whether different programs are able to get kids more or less entrained to the teacher. What does this mean to all of you? Simple. We use these tools to get new insights into how children learn and how to design a classroom that can optimize brain development. This is a beautiful example of the future. And we also are using real-time imaging. I need to end. So we need to be linking ed tech and global partnerships, neuroscience, early development and early identification. And for those of you who don't know what the heck I'm talking about because you're computer scientists, here's what I need from you in ed tech. 3 things. We already have some good technology like GraphoGame and others for reinforcing learning to read. We need to expand that across all the world languages. We're working on that in my global hub. But there's not any good ed tech for preschool. So I'm starting a project in the US looking at children with cochlear implants. And these kids are at elevated risk for all kinds of literacy problems if they're not given good preschool language. We really need better ed tech. That you don't want to teach a 3-year-old to read. That's ridiculous. You want to teach a 3-year-old to become rich, a language professional, so that the brain's ready to learn to read when it needs to learn to read. And this is an area that ed tech really needs to work on. One of my colleagues at Yale, Julia Irwin, has developed a face and audio system to train articulation in children who are deaf or autistic or dyslexic or at risk for dyslexia. And finally and last, we need to have ed tech that goes beyond reading. Here is what happens when you treat reading in 6 or 7 or 8-year-olds. You can often fix decoding, but somewhere around 4th grade, when they have to go from learning to read to reading to learn, the system begins to get fragile again. And it's critical that we have technology that can reinforce not just learning to read, but the 21st century skills. Thank you very much for your attention.
Saurabh Roy to introduce our next keynote speaker.
Disclaimer, I'm not a doctor. It's my real pleasure to invite this dynamic entrepreneur with 20 plus years of experience who has a very deep background in building capacity and exploring the role of AI to see how the global skill mismatch can be addressed, what can be done right from the school level, and what actually gets across to when they reach to the stage when they are supposed to get jobs. So please put your hands together to welcome Harry Gitmo. Thank you.
Automation, robotics, artificial intelligence, and digitalization in general is taking over, which means also we are in the middle of, does my clicker work? I hope it does. Do I have to point in specific location? No, thank you. We are in the middle of also reskilling or upskilling revolution, because our challenge is that when our working environment changes so rapidly, we have to reskill, and that's not only for one report. We have thousands of different kind of vocational, professional, even basic skills reskilling, what we should learn. And everything is because our work is changing, our environment is changing. And that's nothing new. That has happened long time before. First industrial revolution in 1750. Also jobs were lost. Also new skills has to be learned. And many times since that. But the speed and the size of this change is big. And in fact, if we take the newest estimations, both industrial revolution or should we say artificial intelligence and robotics and digitalization, it's approximately 85% of the labor force that should get new skills. And I highlight, no new degrees, not new education, but new skills. And that's completely different than going back to school and starting something from very beginning. And the second big question, do we lose jobs? Yes, of course. But it's wrong word to say, do we lose jobs? Because all the time during mankind history, we have given or we have taken machines to do dangerous, dirty, or otherwise unpleasant tasks. And at the same time, the productivity goes higher and there will be new jobs. But the only challenge is how we can predict the new jobs and how we can prepare people with the skills that are needed in the new jobs. And that is our real question. We shouldn't ask questions that how we can avoid jobs being lost for machines, because that's obvious, it's going to happen. We have to ask, what skills do we need to train? And that's for 5 billion people in the world, 85% of the labor in next 30 years. So it's remarkable. And the unpleasant truth is, if we don't know what the skills are, and we are doing training activities, they are most likely wrong. So that's why we have developed an artificial intelligence solution that is a combination of natural language processing and cognitive reasoning that can understand from natural language the labor processes, so the labor analytics, individual skills analytics, combined with educational needs. But starting from very beginning, The smallest unit is microskill, so it's not like engineering or nursing or something. It's small, like addition or welding metal or ironing fabric. So very small skill. And when our AI can read, for example, job openings or job descriptions or forecast reports in labor markets, it can start to build an understanding based on big data globally. What skills are needed right now? What skills are not needed anymore? What kind of topics are trending up? So there might be something in a couple of years. And I have to say forecasting is always difficult, so there is a factor that we need also human. But reading several job openings, putting them together, we can build an understanding what kind of skills are needed in certain time, in certain industry, in certain area. For example, here, what Finnish construction industry need in May 2018. And here, for example, what Delhi software industry was seeking last month. And what more green, that more the skill is searched after. And what less green, that less the skill is needed. We can also take a list of downtrending skills, so skills that are not searched anymore. But our AI can't make decisions. It is, in that way, it is just a tool. It can collect a huge amount of data that people can't. It can visualize and put it together. But all the discussions have been done by domain professionals. So what this means? That's human work. How it is built and how the data is collected, that machine's work. So we still need domain professionals who are context and culture aware and so on. But okay, understanding the labor market's dynamics is only the beginning. Next thing is what education is doing. Because we have that much degree programs, we have online education, we have private training, and we should understand what we educate right now. So we can do exactly the same. Let the machine do mind mapping and put the maps together. And now we have, for example, in my example, what we educate in Finland in vocational schools for everyone, that construction industry is seeking. And what more green, once again, the more we educate the desired topic. And we can see that the Finnish vocational school educates approximately 30-40% of everything that is searched in the construction industry. And I would say that's good, because no school system can do all. Vocational school, the professionals working in the construction. We need also engineers, we need managers, we need completely the accounting and administration part of the construction industry. So no school can do all. But we have to have data for people to have something to discuss with. And okay, finally, what individual people know or what skills individuals do have. I think most of us do have a LinkedIn account where we have our job titles and what we have done previously. Because our AI already knows what topic, what job title is connected to what kind of skills, what degree program brings what skills. Converting your CV to skills is quite trivial. Of course, for a human it would take a couple of hours per CV, but for machine, less than nanoseconds. But when we have converted my CV to skills, we can see for what is my fit to, for example, construction industry. And my example is my CV, so I have some fit because of my background. But if I won't have a fit, there won't be no green. But I would say more interesting is that in what domains or what industries I fit best. And if we put my data in, for example, data science in top, artificial intelligence in the middle, and robotics in the bottom. What more green, the better fit. What more red, the more I need to get skills. And in my profile, if I want to go robotics, we can clearly see from my data in the bottom that I have to get several skills in order to be qualified in robotics. But I'm not only AI, I can easily see what other areas I fit immediately. And that is for individual very important, especially in fourth industrial revolution, where the jobs are changing. But understanding what industries I fit and what skills I already have, and I'm extending with some other skills, I'm still very good in this industry. So bringing everything visual helps individuals to understand that no matter if the machines are taking jobs, I'm still good in what I've been doing. And getting a couple of more skills, I'm still really good. Of course, the easy task is that when we have my profile as skills, we can easily check that what jobs are good for me. And because we have a quite big local, global data, we can check also in what areas or in what locations are jobs that might be good for you. But then the other topic, because it's very easy to lie on the CV, and also it's very difficult to assess by your own, so self-assessment, what I really know. We have used the similar or the same AI to construct basic level assessment as well as create basic level introductory courses. So idea is that our AI, when it is doing this labor markets analysis, it builds mind map about every topic. So basically, there is a mind map already done for all the topics it has recognized as a skill in labor markets. And this mind map is basically a curriculum, because in curriculum, it describes what we are going to study, what are the core concepts, and into what extent this course is going to be. This is a curriculum. So we only convert it, or the machine converts it, into visual form. And these courses, AI-done courses, AI-made courses, can be integrated, for example, into Moodle, or any learning management system that takes external API calls in. There is a similar mind map, now a bit more visual form, because the graph form is interesting only for mathematicians, but this is for everyone. So basically, every block represents one concept in the mind map. And this is also a course structure. We can create content from open educational resources to fit every topic in the course, and we can also put the course in chatbots. So basically, what our AI do in educational side is pretty much the same what we have always done in e-learning, but now we don't need a human designer in between, which means lower costs on producing courses that has to be done now. So we can just go immediately further. And the assessment part, because the mind map is there. Mind map, we have done a lot of research to make sure the mind maps are valid. But when we have a mind map, the AI can start to make questions like how concepts A, B, and C are related, and establish an open-ended question on that. We type an answer, and the AI analyzes the answer and builds a mind map about it. And if the mind maps are pretty much the same, you are done. If there is no matching in the mind map, no points. And if it is somewhere in between, let's take a next question. And the same with a bit easier form, because writing is sometimes difficult for some people. And once again, it doesn't have anything to do with intelligence, but writing might be difficult. That's why also a bit more complex multiple choice. Like, oh, this is in Finnish. Had to translate. Which of the following words are related to welding? And I have 12 words. I have to click on what might be related, because that shows I'm conceptually aware. Is gas related to welding? Is heat related to welding, and so on. So if I can check the right concepts and leave not to check the wrong concepts, I'm conceptually aware of the topic. And so I get points. I get more green into my map, so I have shown that I know those skills. Doesn't mean the same that we are doing it at the school, but this is definitely better than nothing, or just self-assessment, where some people say that, okay, I'm mastering everything, and some very self-critical people say that, I don't know if I know this. But the idea is to make everything easy, automatized. And so, finally, if we think the reskilling challenge, it's not only to putting more and more effort into educating something that we have done for the last 40 or 50 or 100 years. The critical thing is to first understand what skills do we need. And because the prediction is difficult, we don't have all the skill names even now. We have to accept that changes are fast, the names comes in flight, and all the predictions might change in 3 years. But if we don't even try to build that understanding, we are going to fail. So, building understanding about labor market dynamics. Then second thing is build individual skills models which are detailed enough to answer question what individuals really know. So the title like I'm engineer doesn't tell too much, or I've been working in electrical engineering industry doesn't tell too much. We have to have user models that are extensible, flexible, and compatible with all the other data we have. So with that we can show career path, direct jobs, but what more is that what skills we need in order to get next or better job. And of course, if there is no education available, we have to somehow be able to provide at least a curriculum playlist or some educational playlist and be able to assess the skills in order to make sure we know at least conceptually somebody is aware on something. And basically that's our framework, how we are bringing artificial intelligence to help the reskilling challenge. And we can't do this alone. We are developing just this AI part. So I invite everyone who is interested to take our AI to real work in your own needs, to discuss with us, because we have to do this together with all the players in the industry. Thank you. We have to say that these are skills that are taught by human to human. And that's why I think, and in our approach, we think that is for K-12 education, that for academics, and that's a, let's say, general literacy that should be done by formal educational system and should be part of our everyday life. So, want to highlight, we are not saying that the transferable or soft skills are not important. No, completely different way. They are the most important skills we might have, especially critical thinking. And then the hard skills, they are just adjusting to make sure I get a job. But without soft skills or transferable skills, it's way more difficult. So thank you for a very important question. Yeah. Thank you.
He's available the whole day today and you would not miss him. So I would encourage you, they have done very deep work. He'll be available in this area itself. Please find him and ask deeper questions and understand the work which Head AI is doing deeply. Thanks a lot for being such a patient audience. Thank you.
I'm going to jump into the very next session and I'm happy to introduce Zigor, who will be moderating the next session on global guidelines. Zigor. Yeah. Oops.
Thanks for being here with us today to discuss, well, this Catalytic session to discuss a very important topic, probably one of the most important in this year's tech conference, which is guidelines. Digital learning is a very exciting thing. It's very exciting for teachers and parents and users and everybody concerned, because it brings us the opportunity to invent and reinvent education and make it more compliant with the needs of the 21st century. It's also very exciting for investors because there's an increasing market, and they can see that with digital learning. So just to give you a few features, the digital games for education, the market for it is about $3 billion, or was about $3 billion last year, and is expected to go up to $8 billion, by 2022, I think. And the overall EdTech market is estimated to over 250 billion in 2020. So this is a huge market, and the developers are very excited as well, because for them it's an opportunity to grab some of these investments done and make more money. So the result of this is that it attracts a lot of people and lots of kinds of people who develop all sorts of applications that are not all up to the task, and are not all, I regret to say, at the right quality. So it took months choosing the right application for him when I wanted to introduce him to the iPad and the new technologies and interactivity and all that. So there's a growing need or a growing feeling that we need a way to certificate the applications that are coming to the market, so that it's going to be easier for us to distinguish which are the ones that fit the needs, which are the ones that have good outcomes, verified outcomes, just like a little bit like when you go to a supermarket and you want an organic product, where you have a very distinctive organic logo on it. And it prevents you from going through all the products and see all the ingredients to figure out the ones you want to buy or not. So doing some kind of certification for digital learning application, I think, is something that is really needed at the moment. So when you think about certification, the first step is establishing a set of guidelines that people will have to, or developers will have to comply with in order to get the certification. So this process of establishing guidelines is always a very delicate one, because a lot of people have to agree. So it's very easy to do very vague guidelines, because everybody will agree with these vague guidelines, but they're useless because they don't serve the purpose. But on the other hand, you make them too strict or too complicated, nobody will go through the process of trying to comply with the guidelines. So they're useless as well. And this balance is always, in every case, very difficult to achieve. But we have two additional problems with digital learning, and one is learning. One of the biggest challenges of learning in the 21st century is lifelong learning. So the guidelines have to encompass a huge, very broad scope, from children age 5, 7, all the way up to adults that have already 1, 2, or 3 careers behind them, and for some reason want to learn something new because they need to, or because they want to, because they have time and they want to learn something new. So learning is not only for kids, learning is for everybody. And when I say everybody, I mean really almost the whole population of the world, because you cannot limit yourself to one country or even one continent. The guidelines should encompass learning all over the world, in India, but also in China, but also in North America, South America, Europe, the rest of Asia. So it's really North Pole, South Pole, everywhere. So it's really very complete. The scope of it is really very, very broad. And the other difficulty in digital learning is digital. I mean, What today grows faster and evolves faster and more deeply than technology? I think nothing. So we need to, the guidelines need to encompass technologies that we don't even know will exist in the future. And if it fails to do that, it will fail as well. So extremely complicated, more complicated than usual. And since I'm very lazy myself, I think it's my first and best quality I have, I had to wonder, is it really worth the effort? Do we really need guidelines? So I think this is a first question to ask. Is there another way to do it besides guidelines? So why guidelines? So we have with us in this fantastic panel Professor Vali Kumari, who's a teacher of computer science and engineering at the Andhra University, and Susanna Pollack from this fantastic organization called Games for Change that promotes social change through video games. They can share their perspectives on what could encompass, what should be in these guidelines for them to be effective in the perspective of a teacher and with the perspective of somebody trying to change the world through digital application and especially games. We also have two entrepreneurs with us.
Problems of how to get educational technology into the classroom more effectively. And of the 65 companies, I think it's something like around 60% of them are founded by teachers, former teachers and current teachers. And I think it's around 100% of them have teachers that are working as employees in their companies. So a lot of the educational technology that I am closest to, I understand that there are bigger organizations out there that do things differently, but in the small to medium-sized companies that I'm working with are really teacher-driven. And so there is a desire, a very pure desire to turn out very high-quality tools that teachers can use and students can use. So we have to balance the conversation between, yes, corporations do drive a lot of educational and technology development, but a lot of it is driven by teachers, maybe parents, students too, because we want the students to test it. So, as I said at the beginning of my little comment here, it's not clear how do we get the researchers and the developers to work together. How do we make sure that the teachers that are involved in this process are being heard? It's complicated, and the conversation is going to keep continuing. That's why I'm so excited to be here. But I do not have a conclusive statement that's going to say this is the best way forward.
Would you like to make to have a reaction on what Avery just said, or the important point I think that Susanna raised earlier about the content, the fact that the guidelines should be content neutral?
Well, I think I was alluding to that actually when I was sort of saying not to be policy prescriptive, and you know, my observation is that education is in fact more closely guarded by policymakers than any other sector. It's one that it's very sensitive. So if these guidelines are expected to have at least some value, we'll have to make sure that they don't get into content specification. I completely agree with Susanna in the sense it should provide these broad parameters that one could follow, but when it comes to the actual content, you could sort of say, I think the guidelines shouldn't be specifying what learning outcomes should be. What it should sort of say is that whatever that is being produced should specifically specify what learning outcomes are. But the guidelines are not going to say, you know, for maths, it has to be A, B, C, D. That's been prescriptive. You sort of say, most probably in maths, well, whatever that's been presented should have learning outcomes clearly highlighted within the model. So that's the broadness that it will go to. The one challenge I think, as Avery was pointing out, is research and the time lag between research and policy. But that's why I was saying that it has to be a dynamic set of guidelines which needs to be continuously updated with the latest research so that, that it doesn't become static and it just becomes more stifling. And I'm very, very appreciative of what Santori was highlighting, is that it doesn't become a barrier. And I don't think it should be a UNESCO guide. The guidelines would be, yes, it was driven by UNESCO, but if the member states adopted, which is the way that the high-level policy forum wanted it to go, and it is the member states. But we have to make sure that it doesn't become a bureaucratic nightmare, that good content and good products are not getting through for either political reasons or whatsoever. But the question I wanted to actually maybe have a discussion on is something that Susanna brought up, is that, so the guidelines can be general, but do we need to have within the broader set of guidelines specific subsections to teachers, to policymakers, in terms of how to use the guideline? I remember when we finished the Millennium Ecosystem Assessment, we had the full report, but then we had specific sections on biodiversity, one on dry lands, one on water, and then one for the private sector, one for policymakers, so that whatever that was relevant to them was extracted from the big report and then just packaged for them. And I'm wondering whether there would be utility to do something like that, drawing from that guidelines. So what would be relevant for the teacher? Some of the key stakeholders, content development, what would be the most relevant? I don't know, I haven't thought about it, but it seems to be emerging from this discussion as well as some of the earlier discussions we had during the high-level policy forum as well.
Thank you. When I say thank you for coming earlier, I was not just being merely polite, but thank you because we also count on you with your questions and your remarks to help us push the reflection forward. So if people have questions in the audience, we are extremely welcome.
Right. My question is triggered a bit to Zachary and the previous presenter, previous one, yeah. Can't these guidelines themselves be living, changing, dynamic, factoring in the impact that they are creating? As educators, as policymakers, you are crystal clear of what you want to achieve. You may not know how it is best achieved. And you know when something is going wrong. And you know when something is working. So, and I heard very carefully your worry about being prescriptive or dictatorial or being suggestive, and then nobody is going to follow. But if it is AI based, if the inputs are taken from the global thought stream that is so well captured now, and if those inputs come to a constantly calibrating its education pattern, so the speed of development that worries you, that if it takes us 3 years to come up with certification guidelines, and no matter, God knows how much would have been developed in the interim. So those things might get kind of factored in. Just a thought, it might be a really stupid thought I'll share.
Well, I guess if 193 countries will be, revising them every year, it's not going to be very flexible. But maybe there is no opportunity for there being some sort of a board or advisors who will be revising them every now and then, maybe yearly, looking at the global landscape of what are the hot topics, how the values are changing. Obviously, the values and the contents and the sensitive topics, for example, that these contents can even cover are different in various parts of the world. So, but definitely, I like the idea because the world is definitely changing changing much faster than the countries can come to, conclusions.
If I understand correctly, your comment and question were concerning the use of artificial intelligence and the writing of these guidelines? Is that correct? How to use artificial intelligence? Okay, so this is so new, well, at least for me and the work that we're doing, the idea of using some kind of artificial intelligence to help us make decisions. I think that the way that artificial intelligence can help us make decisions, it's a little like either a user or a content expert. When we make games, we don't always have an expertise in the content that we're making a game for. So what we do is we work, for instance, with a content expert, whether they be in math or science or healthcare or whatever, and we have to make sure that we're working with that person so that we're making the right decisions. And the way that I envision the use of AI, it is very new to me, and this might change, but the way I look at it is a little bit like a content expert in helping us make those decisions so that we make more effective decisions based on use and also based on outcomes. So we can look at it from the user perspective, and then we can also look at it on an outcome perspective. What's happening to the learning outcomes from the use? It is a great question, and I don't have the answer yet, and I would love to continue the conversation.
Can I just like one very practical idea just came to mind, if somebody wants to make a product out of this. So maybe, when people are doing Google searches, there would be an AI that would be pointing, I'm sure that Google is already doing that, taking up the most frequently asked questions. Like for example in UK after Brexit vote, then after that, one of the most common Google searches was what is European Union? So maybe at that point somebody could have taken the initiative and built a piece of content or a game about explaining European Union. So maybe a tool like this could be one of the guidelines for the developers looking at opportunities to make impact.
Yeah. Thanks.
Well, you brought up a very interesting question, because one of the things that we've been recommending is, take an example for the IPCC. For those who are not aware of what it stands for, is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Somewhere the authoritative scientific body that brings in every 5 years or so the latest research on climate change. But what they do now, I think, is outdated, and they're outdated by two steps. I've written on this is that they're still depending on a selected number of experts that are nominated by the countries. So you've got about 1,500, 1,900 scientists, and sometimes even lower than that. They still are not gone to the next step, which we should be doing, is doing it through what I call the crowd in the cloud, which means you have a smaller group of shepherds, which are nominated by the governments, but they really open it up, because there are many, many experts working in this field who have published, who have written, and who've got things to say. We should encourage them. We haven't got to that part yet at this. What you're suggesting is now the second step, because AI, I think, would be able to harvest the kind of literature out there, going through Google Scholar, going through, open up the academic journals, the publishing companies that own those journals, and doing a word content analysis, etc. And you can harvest that literature much faster than even 5,000-6,000 scientists. But still, once that's been harvested and processed with an AI algorithm, is then a group of scientists to then, as stakeholders. I think I need to change with times. So no longer just scientists, stakeholders. The different stakeholders should then use that to improve what we have. So with the guidelines, that would be the case. And in response to Santori's, yes, if it every year, that's it. The transaction cost, it will just whittle down. But the good news is they don't meet every year, they meet every 2 years. But I wouldn't even advocate revising these guidelines every 2 years. I would say every 5 years. But what they do have, if it becomes extremely complex and is extremely important, they set up an intergovernmental body which is a subsidiary organ of UNESCO, which has its own members, but of course from the member states. And then they report regularly, so they are monitoring that all the time. So the international IOC, the international something for the International Ocean Commission, it's a subsidiary body of UNESCO, but they oversee the health of the oceans and they report regularly.
Another question from the audience?
Yes, I have a question. I have from first.
Thank you.
I have a question to all of the panelists. That you raised the certification issue, and somebody they are worried about the flight, I think. But my question: why all of you are worried or intention for certification? What is going on in the existing situation? The developing country, Indian too, and other countries, they are developing scientists and other educational material, and they are making profit. And are they worried about certification, or there is any certification process? As per I know, there is no. Then why do you think the certification issue for digital content, VR content, or artificial intelligence and like others? The investors and developers, they are thinking the $1 million business is lying for them. Let them come. Let them come. If they think they can provide good material for the learners for their development, then they will survive, and others will not survive. This is the business issue. And of course, I will suggest another. Yeah, of course, the world should have a guideline. Professor Balikubari mentioned it is seriously the two perspectives, health issue and addiction issue. And we cannot make our learners addicted in games and like others. The researcher, they are doing research, of course the researcher will do it, and other things, another things that law issue. In study, they arranged a very nice session. They invited 2 lawyers from one US and one from France. And they discussed about the law perspective. And it's a nice gathering. This conference of the beauty is nice gathering. They invited lawyers, they invited neuroscientists, they invited developers, they invited different people. And they are sharing the ideas of each other. And by these the guideline will be developed. And there should have a guideline. Should have a guideline from 2 points of view. And another thing, many of the countries, they are developing, the legislation point of view, the parliamentarian, they are formulating law for cyber security. And these issues can cover, I think, if it is helpful, then government will take decision. Maybe international perspective, UNESCO and MGM and other organizations will think for it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Since you say it's to you business issue, maybe Avery, you want to answer to that, or give us your opinion on that?
So if I can summarize this, it's the question of the business investment in educational technology and game-based learning and its impact or potential impact on the certification process. Is that about correct? Why? Oh, I think the benefit of the certification is twofold. One, it helps teachers to make decisions